What's up everybody, Dan here. Thanks so much for joining in for today's video. So today I'm going to give you my first impressions after the build of this Trak Racer TR80 profile cockpit. This is the light version. So this is their entry version into profile cockpits. Honestly, it's very similar to other ones that I've used in the past. Most of these profile rigs are going to be pretty daggone similar. If I'm just being honest there, they almost look identical for the most part, just depending on what size profile you get is going to be the difference there. And then the mounting options. So your pedal plates, your wheel plate, things like that, how you mount your peripherals to the rig is going to be what varies from manufacturer to manufacturer. But for the most part, the profile structure itself is going to be very similar. So if you have someone specific that you like that you've used in the past, you can just buy their profile rig if you like them because they're going to be the same. So what I typically do though when I put something together here is as I am going through the build process and the ordering process and things like that, what I do is I jot down in my phone little notes of things that I think that you may want to know about or that you need to know about before you jump into a purchase like this. Because while this is a budget or an entry, it's not budget, sorry, it's an entry version into the profile rig space. This one is still expensive. They're all still expensive. So for example, this was on sale. I paid under $400 for the profile rig itself, but then you have to add in a seat. And if you go through them and you want the seat that can lean back like this one here, which is their most expensive seat, you're going to spend another $350. Then on top of that, Trak Racer specifically charges you shipping. So you're talking about, even though it's an entry, quote unquote, into profile rigs, this is still getting very close to $1,000. And I think it may have even been slightly over $1,000. But anyway, so it's not a cheap thing to get into, which is a pretty commonality in sim racing in general. So this is why I like to put these videos together, these first impressions. They're not a review, but they're things that came to mind, thoughts and things that I thought you would want to know as I was going through the process of putting it together and initially getting it set up and all that stuff. So like I said, I'm just going to go through the notes that I've got here for you. I do actually jot down notes. I do that on purpose so that I don't miss anything. And so the very first thing I want to talk about is the seat, because the rigs themselves, yes, are not that expensive. You can get them for $300 or $400, especially if they're on sale, but it's the seat that always adds a lot of cost. In this case, it definitely does. So this seat, which is very nice, but if you want this seat, it's going to cost you another $350. And then of course, the weight adds a little bit more to the shipping and stuff like that. So that's price things you need to keep in mind. Now, the first thing I want to talk about the seat itself is actually a negative. But before I talk about that, I want to say that generally the seat is very nice and very comfortable. But the first thing is something that you need to know, because I messed up, didn't realize this. Anytime I've ever purchased a seat before from a sim racing manufacturer, when I bought a rig or a sports seat for cars in the real world, they always come with a seat slider. And I was under the impression that if I bought the seat, because the website says if you buy the seat and add it, it comes with the bracket, which typically means bracket and slider in the sport seat world, whether in sim racing or cars. I was under the impression that it came with a slider. Well, it does not. So when I was unboxing all the packages, I thought that they just accidentally didn't send me the slider. So I emailed out to them, and then they got back to me fairly quickly and said that, oh no, we're sorry. The light profile cockpit is meant to be a budget cockpit, and we get rid of some things, or we don't offer some things with that to save you, the end user, cost. Okay, I get the mentality behind that. However, you're missing the mark here if you're going to charge someone $350 for a seat and not include the slider. In my mind, the slider is not part of the rig. It should not be associated with the rig. The slider is part of the seat. So if I buy the rig and then I click, which is what I did, to add the seat for $350 extra, it needs to come with the slider. End of story. But it doesn't. And I went back and looked at the website, and you have to go pretty far down the page much farther than most people are actually going to go. Let's be real here. Way down to the bottom to see that it is an optional extra for this rig. The other thing too is I added some extras, and they do make it pretty easy to add extras. You go on the main page of the rig itself, and then over on the side they've got really nice pictures of all the things you can add. For example, I added caster wheels, which I'll talk about later. I added the larger shifter mount. Those were all things that I had available to click very easily and add. The slider for the seat was not an option to add, which is just another thing that made me assume, you know what they say about assuming things. It makes a you-know-what out of you and me. I know this. I should have known better. But this seat does not come with a slider, so if that is something that you want, you need to make sure you have to physically leave the page for the rig, which is crazy. Go into add-ons through a drop-down menu and then physically add the slider to your cart. Now, when they emailed me back, they said that they're working on a website, a new website that they're going to launch, and it will be easier to both understand that it doesn't come with it, and it will be easier to add the slider to the seat. But still, if Trak Racer watches this video, I need you to know that it is inexcusable to charge $350 for a seat, any seat, sim racing or not, and not include the slider. The slider needs to be part of the seat, and it needs to come with the seat. When you buy a rig like this, and then you add this seat, I can't say this enough, the slider needs to be part of the seat if it's going to be that expensive, and it is not. So you guys need to know that. I want to make sure that I put that first in this video. Now, away from the negative stuff, the seat itself, this is a phenomenal seat. It is very comfortable. I've already done some racing in it. I don't see any issues of me doing long stints in this. The materials seem to be very premium. Of course, it's not going to be real leather and it's not real Alcantara, but the materials they are using do make you think that it's real leather and do make you think that it's real Alcantara or suede. All of the stitching seems to be very nice. Dare I say that this seat is actually, the seat itself is actually nicer than some of the real seats that I've had in premium cars in the real world. This is very, very nice. Also, typically when you get seats that are like from sim racing manufacturers and stuff, the seat is okay, but the plastic on the sides of it is kind of cheap, doesn't really stay on there that well, kind of hangs off. The handle that you adjust the seat back is not that great and stuff, but that's not the case here. All this stuff is really solid, and the seat itself is money. It just needs to come with a slider at $350, or you need to reduce the price of the seat. Shouldn't have anything to do with the rig. It's the seat you're adding that should have the slider. Okay, so let's move to the next thing here. So shipping. A lot of manufacturers, you do not have to pay for shipping when you buy something this expensive. That is not the case with Trak Racer, so that is a deterrent that you may want to think about when you're thinking about buying one of these rigs. Trak Racer charges you shipping. This stuff is really heavy, which means shipping is very expensive. So when you're already purchasing an overall package that is close to the $1,000 mark, and then you tack on $100, $150 worth of shipping, depending on how much stuff you add on to this, it just pushes the price range further out in left field. In left field. And it's just, I think when you're purchasing something this expensive, I think that the shipping should be included. They need to figure out a way to make the shipping free here, because a lot of manufacturers do it, so clearly it can work. The other thing about the shipping, which is really annoying, to be honest, is different components for the same rig were shipped through different couriers. So FedEx sent me some stuff, and I hate FedEx. UPS sent me some stuff. That worked out fine. And USPS shipped me some stuff. But why in the world is all this stuff that is part of one package coming from various different places at various different times? Trak Racer really needs to figure that out. They need to ship all this stuff from the same warehouse, because I know that they've got a warehouse. It should all be shipped from the same warehouse, and it should all be sent and end up at your house at the same time. Now, with that said, I did have everything. Everything did eventually come, other than the seat slider again, because that was not included. But everything came, everything got here, and it's just kind of annoying that it all came from different carriers at different times, because when you're looking forward to something like this coming, you want it all to show up at the same time so you can start putting it together and stuff like that. All right, next thing I want to talk about is the wheel deck. So there are many different options of wheel decks that you can get for this specific rig, which is typical for any manufacturer. A lot of people get side mount rigs or a side mount wheel decks, and I could have done that for the Fanatic rig, but I typically go with a flat wheel deck because I am taking on and removing many different wheelbases and stuff like that, and the flat wheel deck is typically easier to do that. Now, when I started putting this together, I didn't really like it initially because instead of this being one solid piece of metal, it's split into three different pieces. So these side pieces here and then the top pieces actually get bolted together with the standard corner brackets that you use for profile rigs. And it was kind of awkward to get it all lined up. And I don't know, it just seemed like it made it a little more annoying than what it had to be the way they put it together. I'm sure it's for cost that they do that, but initially I didn't like it. Now I changed my mind about that, and I want you to know that when I started to mount the wheelbase. Because it was able to be taken apart, what that meant is I could leave the side brackets where they were and very easily just unbolt 4 bolts from the top, pull the actual plate itself off, flip it upside down, mount my wheelbase on it very easily because then I had access to it. I could flip everything all around. Then once the wheelbase was mounted to it, I can flip it back over and literally just tighten up those 4 bolts. And I don't know if that was their intention on why they did this. Honestly, I think it was just a cost savings thing because it's probably cheaper to manufacture 3 smaller pieces with no 90 degrees than it would be to manufacture 1 piece with 2 90 degrees. I'm assuming, I don't know. But anyways, what I realized is that it made it a lot easier to mount the wheelbase when it was time to do that. So something I did not like at first, I ended up liking just fine once I got further into the details of putting it all together. All right, so I want to talk about the shifter bracket. So these smaller profile rigs, typically I'm going to call these uprights arms that hold the wheel plate. It's the same with this one, other manufacturers as well. They typically do not come with this extended shifter bracket here. They come with a smaller one and it doesn't have a support at the back. I've had profile rigs like that in the past, and what it does is it allows for some flex in the uprights that hold the wheelbase. So I highly recommend that you get their optional longer shifter arm, not because it's longer necessarily, but because it adds some additional support to the uprights, adding some additional stability overall to the rig. So you don't need it, but if you're buying a profile rig, you're probably buying a profile rig to get that ultimate stability. And if you're trying to get the ultimate stability in some of these smaller profile rigs, you're going to want to get their additional shifter arm because it gives that stability bracket in the back. And overall, it just makes the rig that much more stable. One thing I forgot to mention about that is if you do get the longer arm and you've got an adjustable back seat like this one, it does make it a little bit awkward to get to the handle on the seats. That's just something to be aware of. You can still get to it fine and you can move it. It's just not as easy as reaching your hand down there. You kind of got to make sure you're getting your hand in between the actual profile bracket itself, that upright, and the handle itself. It's just something to know, so I jotted it down. Putting the this right here, putting that upright on there to give you that extra stability actually a little bit gets in the way of the latch that adjusts the seat back here. Next thing I want to talk about is the pedal plate. All good stuff here. I got nothing bad to say about this pedal plate. There are so many holes pre-drilled in this thing, there's no possible way that the pedals that you have will not somehow mount to this pedal plate. I've got the V&M light pedals, and I was able to mount them no problem, and there was a lot of adjustability left and right, forward and back. And if I can mount these quote-unquote custom, non-Fanatic, non-Thrustmaster, non-normal pedals on here with no problem, then you're not going to have any issues mounting any kind of pedals. And the other thing about it is super thick. I don't really do specs and stuff like that. I don't know how thick it is in millimeters exactly, but it's stiff enough that this very solid, very hard brake pedal isn't making this flex at all. Now, in the directions, they do say that you're supposed to mount it with a bit of an angle. So the front of the wheel, or the front of the pedal deck is actually supposed to mount to those uprights right there. So you have some angle in it. But the V&M pedals, I couldn't do that because it made the pedals angle back and it kind of hurt my ankles a little bit. So I've actually put it completely flat, which put the V&M pedals in a good position, and I've had no issues with it. It's not how they say that you should do it in the directions, but it's worked perfectly fine for me, and I still use the uprights in the front of the rig for the controller box for the V&M pedals. So it's not like I'm wasting any components or anything like that, but the pedal plate is fantastic. All right, next thing I want to talk about is casters. So I've had a bunch of sim racing rigs over the years. I have never had casters before, but absolutely, from here on out, I will definitely recommend that if you need to move your rigs at all, even once a month, get the casters. Having casters on these rigs, being able to move it over here to make this video and then slide it right back, or even if I didn't make videos and I just needed to move it to make room on my desk or whatever the reason, just get the casters. The casters make life so much easier. They're not that expensive. You can lock them. Yes, they are going to add, I've noticed they added just a slight bit of overall movement of the cockpit just because you don't have that stability of the cockpit being flat on the floor anymore. But it's not enough for you to notice, and it's not like traditional flex that we talk about that makes you not feel your steering wheel, because the movement we've got here is the whole rig slightly moving ever so slightly on the casters. It's not a disconnect that you have from your seat to the wheelbase because of flex in like uprights or something like that. It's just a movement you get because of the casters. But still, I think it is well worth it because those are lifesavers. It's life-changing. Having casters on your rig is life-changing. I definitely recommend picking them up because they're not that expensive, so add them to your cart when you're ordering a profile rig. And the last thing I want to touch on is some of the additional bracketry that Trak Racer specifically adds to their rigs for additional stability. So most of these profile rigs, I probably mentioned this earlier in this video, are going to be very similar as far as the frame goes. They use the very same corner brackets, like right there, to hold everything together. They're 90-degree corner brackets, and everything is kind of bolted together in the same fashion. That is no different here. However, there are a few critical spots where Trak Racer goes over and beyond, even in their light profile cockpit, but definitely in their larger cockpits too, where it's just adding some additional stability. If you see on the outside of the shifter arm here where their logo is, so not only does it have these two 90-degree brackets holding that arm, it also has that bracket on the outside that adds some additional stability at that joint there. Typically, profile rig manufacturers don't have that, but they do, and believe it or not, it does add some rigidity. Also, the shifter bracket itself is super stable the way they built it, and you don't normally see that extent of stability and design in a profile rig like this. It's typically much less sturdy, if I'm honest. And then also down at the bottom of the uprights for the wheel deck, you'll notice in the video, hopefully you can see that there is a specific bracket used down there. It's not the traditional normal 90-degree brackets that they use. It is a 90-degree bracket specifically made for these uprights that you're supposed to use in that spot. And what it does is it joins together what would normally be two pieces and makes it one. And what that does is it just adds a little more stability, and that was a welcome sign when I took those out of the box, because that is typically a spot that over time can loosen up in a profile rig. I've had that happen. You can cinch them down as tight as you possibly can, but because it's all individual corner brackets, sometimes that stuff gets loose over time, especially if you're running a ton of force feedback through your wheelbase. But I think in time, I think that design is going to prove to keep that stuff tighter and stiffer down the road. So yeah, so overall, I'm very happy with this. Like I said, a lot of these profile rigs are identical, guys. You're not going to get a huge differentiation between one manufacturer to another when it comes to profile rigs in the rig itself, so the profile frame. Where you see the major differences and where you need to make your deciding factor on which one's right for you is their mounting options. So what you physically mount your peripherals to, your wheelbase, your shifter, your pedals, that's where you're going to see the differences. You know, like this specific bracket for the shifter, the way that they design the wheel plate here and the pedal plate, those are going to be the differences, and that's the stuff you really need to pay attention to when you're deciding which manufacturer you want to go with. The big kickers here that may make me go for some other manufacturer down the road is the fact that they don't include the slider in the seat, which I think is crazy, and the fact that shipping is not included. Because when you're looking at GT Omega specifically, their rigs are free shipping. They were last time I looked. So, you know, if you're going to get two rigs that can be shipped in roughly the same amount of time, one has free shipping and one doesn't, and you can save $150 on shipping. I mean, my eyes, you need to go with the one with free shipping because they're going to be very similar. The rig itself is going to be very similar. I will say I've had GT Omega seats in the past. They are nice. They are not this nice, but we'll see when if and when I get a GT Omega rig in-house. I hope to at some point in time. They do have some new seats, and hopefully I can get my hand on a new seat and see how they compare to this one. But just based on the many GT Omega seats that I've had over the years, comparing it with this Trak Racer seat is a lot nicer. I just wish it came with a slider. I know I keep beating that with a baseball bat, but this seat really needs to come with a slider. I think that's crazy. So that's going to be it here, guys. Hopefully I didn't ramble too much, but I just wanted to give you the things that kind of came to my head as I was putting this together, things that I thought you may need to know or you may want to know if you're thinking about making a purchase like this. Eventually, after I've used this for a while, I will do a full review on it, but it's going to be a more structured review like I typically do my reviews, not going to be like a sit down like this. But yeah, so far so good, and I'll keep you guys updated on it. So if this was at all helpful, please click the like button. Hit the subscribe button if you're not, because it really helps the YouTube algorithm. I know YouTubers say this, but hardly anybody that's subscribed to me actually watches my video. Like 75% of the people who watch the videos are just finding my videos in another way and they're not subscribed. So if you happen to land on this and you're not subscribed, please click that subscribe button. It really helps with the YouTube algorithm and all that good stuff. So with all that out of the way, thank you so much for joining in, guys, and I'll talk to you in the next video. We'll see you later.